Indians were brought to southern Africa as indentured laborers beginning in 1860, and their numbers grew rapidly. By 1875, there were 10,000 Indians in the colony of Natal, and by the turn of the century, there were 100,000. Indians in South Africa have tended to remain concentrated in Natal province, with some also living in the Transvaal. In the middle of the 20th century, about 40% of all Indians in South Africa were living in the city of Durban, and 80% in the province of Natal, of which it is part. The growth of a resident Indian population in South Africa was never intended by the white officials there, was opposed by official policy, but was effectively stopped only in the Orange Free State, which brought in no indentured laborers. In Natal, the indentured laborers often remained after their contracts had expired, even though they were entitled to a free return trip to India. Indian labor was wanted in South Africa, but not an Indian community. At first, Indians were indentured for 5 years, required to remain for an additional 5 years, thus supplying the local labor market, and at the end of that time could choose either free passage to India or a grant of land in South Africa. After many Indians chose the land, that option was removed. Indians who remained in South Africa after their indentures expired were required to purchase a pass from the government at a price which was expected to be prohibitive in relation to their income. Moreover, the law made no provision for an Indian to become a naturalized citizen of South Africa. Only the need to placate the British colonial government of India prevented the law from being harsher and prescribing criminal penalties for failure to return home. While many Indians did return to India, many others did not. The latter either made the financial sacrifices necessary to purchase the pass, or else simply evaded the law. While the Transvaal did not import indentured laborers from India, many of those from Natal moved into the Transvaal after their contracts expired, often as small traders. Their relative prosperity led others in India to sail directly to the Transvaal. As a resident Indian population grew, whites in the Transvaal created political pressure for restrictions on the Indians. The Orange Free State simply barred Indians entirely, and only a negligible number settled there in violation of the law. The Cape Colony had no restrictions on Asian immigration during the 19th century, but few came there, and those who did were often from Natal or the Transvaal, rather than from India. The geographic and social origins of the Indians changed as the successive waves of indentured laborers were succeeded by waves of passenger Indians paying their own way. Untouchables from Madras and Calcutta were prominent in the early indentured migration, but the later waves that came as commercial traders were more likely to come from Western India, with Gujaratis being prominent among them. Even these passenger Indians, however, were poor by Western standards, and their commercial activity often began as marginal peddlers selling fruits and vegetables door to door at cheap prices. Indians in South Africa also went into a variety of other occupations. Those who spoke English could work as cooks, waiters, junior clerks, or drivers, while others went into construction, painting, fishing, and other trades and occupations. In heavy manual labor, they could not compete with the bigger and stronger Africans. In agriculture, Indians in Natal often converted wasteland, unused by either Europeans or Africans, into gardens from which they supplied fruits and vegetables in the local markets. As early as 1886, an official report said, "Before there was a free Indian population, the towns of Pietermaritzburg and Durban had no supply of fruit, vegetables, and fish. At present, all these things are fully supplied. We have never had any immigrants from Europe who have shown any inclination to become market gardeners and fishermen." The early Indian market gardeners were largely illiterate people, living in shanty housing and carrying baskets of produce door to door to eke out a living. They were noted for their long hours of work, through the day and into the night. Some were seen weeding their gardens by moonlight. Only slowly over the years did they rise to a modest level of living, in some cases eventually buying a truck to deliver their produce, or moving from a shanty into a tiny house. While agriculture was a natural progression for former plantation laborers, Gujaratis often began in commerce upon their arrival from India, setting up small businesses in competition with whites in Natal, the Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. As elsewhere, the Indian retailer was willing to adjust his transactions to the special needs of his clientele, often poor Africans. Indian stores tended to be open long hours, to charge lower prices than the Europeans charged, and to extend credit. Many Indians learned an African language and employed African assistants. They were hated by the Europeans as unfair competition and denounced by the Africans as exploiters. The reactions of the whites began to make themselves felt politically in policies designed to hamstring Indian economic activities and personal life, with special restrictions and taxes. Discrimination against Indians as employees was strongest in the government itself, where the principle that no European could be subordinate to a non-European restricted the Indians to the lowest jobs. The government's issuance of licenses to engage in various trades likewise discriminated against the Indians, though it did not wholly exclude them. The government also restricted Indians' rights to purchase land. The same discriminatory approach was manifested in the provision of government services, notably education. Indian resistance to discriminatory policies was organized by a young attorney from India named Mohandas K. Gandhi. His political career and non-violent resistance techniques began in South Africa before they were applied in India. By and large, however, the repression of the Indians, among others, remained an enduring feature of South African life, especially after apartheid. Relations between Indians and black Africans were also often marked by antagonism. In Durban in 1949, a fight between a black youth and an Indian shopkeeper escalated into a mass riot in which 142 people were killed. Despite the opposition of both blacks and Indians to apartheid, it was difficult for them to make common cause politically, though some cooperation slowly emerged. Still, ironically, black and Indian opposition to apartheid was itself largely separate racially. Another African Indian riot erupted in Durban in 1985, with African mobs looting Indian stores and destroying Indian homes. Asians, almost all Indians, have historically been from 2 to 3% of the population of South Africa, and have been about as urbanized as the whites. Asians' average family income has historically been more than double that of black Africans in South Africa, but less than a third that of whites. Asians have worked in commerce and industry to about the same extent as the whites, and much more so than blacks. As in other countries, intergroup income comparisons that ignore regional and rural-urban differences can be misleading, as are differences which ignore family size. As of 1951, the per capita income of Indians in Durban was slightly lower than that of Africans in Durban, significantly less than that of coloreds in Durban, and only 1/7 that of whites in Durban. As of 1982, the average monthly earnings of Asians in South Africa, almost all Indians, was still just over half that of whites, and was just over 1/3 more than that of blacks. As elsewhere, the caste system has not survived completely intact among the overseas Indians in South Africa, but neither has it vanished entirely or lost all significance. It remains strongest among Hindu Gujaratis. Gujaratis also have by far the highest average income among the various Indian groups in South Africa, more than 60% higher than among Indians who speak English in the home, and more than double the incomes of Indians who speak Urdu, Hindi, Tamil, or Telugu. Most Indians in South Africa speak English as one of their languages, for English serves as a lingua franca within a polyglot community. A growing minority of Indians also speak English at home, especially among the younger generation. As in other groups and other societies, the Indian culture is most self-consciously promoted by Indian intellectuals, who are themselves thoroughly westernized. Internal differences among Indians have been sharp in South Africa, as in India itself and in other countries around the world. Intermarriage is rare among the various language groups of Indians in South Africa, much less between Hindus and Muslims. Internally fragmented and facing antagonism from blacks and whites alike, Indians have been very vulnerable in South Africa, both during the era of white minority rule and in the subsequent era of black rule.